Stars Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande, and this is the Broadway adaptation of Wicked. It's the prequel of how Glinda and Elphaba went from best friends to worst enemies in this two-parter film. This is the first part of Wicked. We have Wicked Part 2 coming out next year, and honestly, I have not really been all that excited for this movie. The trailers have done really nothing to entice me. Really, the only thing that made me remotely interested in checking this film out is that we have director John M. Chu behind the cameras. He directed two of the best Step Up movies, he directed two Justin Bieber documentaries, and he also directed G.I. Joe Retaliation and Now You See Me Too. Two movies that a lot of people really probably forgot, but really his turning point as a director came when he directed 2018's Crazy Rich Asians. Not only was it a financial success, but that movie was surprisingly good. It got a strong critical reception and it also got strong audience reception. And he also directed my personal favorite and one of the most devastating results that we had at the box office during the pandemic, In the Heights. I am obsessed with that movie. So really that was the only thing that had me remotely interested in checking out Wicked Part 1. So that's probably going to turn off a lot of people that aren't really big on two-parters. Know that going in. This is the first part. Next year, you get the full act. So let's go ahead and get started with the review. So starting off with the goods of this movie. Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande are fantastic in this movie. Not only do they sell you on the rivalry at the beginning when they first meet, but as soon as they start getting warmer to each other and getting a little bit close, building that relationship, I thought was done great. Because that relationship that we have building between Elphaba and Glinda is the thing that really holds this movie together. They do a really good job of making you cheer for these two, and you don't want them to become enemies, even though you know exactly where that road is going to be leading. And that's what I got a little bit more attached to. It's just that relationship that they were building, that bond between Glinda and Elphaba that they worked in pretty well. And that chemistry between both of them are fantastic. They both have wonderful chemistry with one another, and their singing talents, no denying, that's one of the reasons why they got cast in these roles. And boy, do they sing their hearts out. I'm not the biggest fan of the musical numbers in here, but whenever they were singing, my attention was in full. So I really enjoyed their performance. The performances from everybody, not only just from them, but you also have Jonathan Bailey, who is kind of like their prince in here. You have Marissa Badeau, who plays Alphaba's sister. And then you also have some supporting characters here from Ethan Slater, Michelle Yeoh, and Jeff Goldblum. Some of them have smaller roles that don't really have a huge impact on the movie, but they do well with what they're given. It's pretty fun to see them interact with one another, seeing the divides that we have in here between everybody and Elphaba. It almost feels like it's just her against the entire world because of the color of her skin. And I was really surprised by how much I really enjoyed this movie, because this movie is, I'm gonna use the big D word, delightful. I was really surprised by this movie. Like I said, leading up to this movie, I was not all that interested, but as soon as my butt was sitting there and we get transported to the wonderful world of Oz and all those surrounding areas, you do get teleported to this world. I read that John M. Chu didn't really want a lot of CGI or green screen or blue screens in here. He wanted everything to be practical, and you can just see the budget on screen. Everything in here, from the buildings to the sidewalks to the trees to the plants, pretty much everything is just absolutely wonderful. It is absolutely breathtaking to see, because nowadays when we have movies like Red One that cost 250 million and you don't see the budget on screen, you see the budget entirely in Wicked. The way that the landscapes look, the way that the buildings are constructed, it all feels so wonderful that you just want to be able to get teleported to this place immediately. And I think that is one of the biggest compliment that I have for this movie, is the fact that this movie does a really good job with its practical effects. It brings you in here and it just makes you want to live in this world. You do get some CGI here and there, but even with some of the CGI that we have in here, it's still done pretty well. And while I wasn't the biggest fan of the musical numbers, you can definitely tell that these are just wonderful set pieces to look at. The music didn't work for me, but I appreciate a lot of the choreography for a lot of these musical numbers that I thought were really interesting to see on screen. I just wish the music in this movie was a lot better. There are a couple of songs in here that makes you feel powerful and makes you feel like you just want to stand up and cheer, and I really like when we got to those moments. This movie clocks in at about 2 hours and 40 minutes, and boy, do you start feeling it once we get into the third act of this movie. This movie could have easily have just been cut off at the part where we are going to Oz, and this movie would have been better and a little bit more enjoyable, because as soon as we start getting into the third act of this movie, it just feels like they are trying to toss a lot of that Wizard of Oz things for the fans of the movie and of the Broadway play. We get to see the origin of the Yellow Brick Road, we get to see the origins of the flying monkeys, we get to see the origins of the hat, and it felt like they were just trying to pack a lot in here when it could have just been a simple story. And then part two could have been a lot of that Wizard of Oz face in there. That is really the big issue that I have with this movie, is the fact that it overstays its welcome. For some people, they might enjoy that. For people like me that really don't like long movies, you're probably going to start feeling the length of this movie once we get into the third act, because they are just cramming a lot in here to set up for part two and to set up what's to come in The Wizard of Oz. So overall, I was surprised by how much I really enjoyed this movie, because there are some things in here that I really liked and I appreciated them for doing. But once we get into the third act and they start throwing a lot in here, that is when it gets a little bit overstuffed and becomes more like a chore to get through instead of being more enjoyable than what we got before. You have some characters in here that don't really do much for the plot or for any of the other characters. If you've never seen The Wizard of Oz and you've never seen the Broadway play, this might be an enjoyable movie. Just know that this is a part one to a part two. So if you're on the fence about checking this movie out, I would wait until you get part two. With this being a first part, it's going to have a lot of the issues that a lot of the part one movies have. They don't have a conclusive ending, and it just leaves the doorway open for part two. So I think this movie would have been better with the two parts attached to it. But if you're somebody that hasn't been really remotely interested in this movie, then I would recommend you wait for part two to come out, and then you can just binge both of them like a sandwich. But if you are a fan of The Wizard of Oz and you enjoy the Broadway play, I think you're going to enjoy this movie a lot more than me, because there are some wonderful surprises and Easter eggs from the Broadway play thrown in here that I think a lot of the fans are going to really enjoy and see. But those are my thoughts on Wicked. Are you guys planning on checking this film out, or is this a movie that you have just lost interest because either A, the trailers haven't really done much for you, or a lot of the controversy has really drawn your excitement for this movie? Go ahead and drop your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll catch you guys for the next video.